I'm Justin.
Radio DJ voice time.
Okay, this is
Okay.
Justin,
And this is Eric.
and we're game developers.
Talking about video game. Oh, I talked over you. I guess we can mute each other with the recording.
I sure can. I intend to do so. We decided to start a YouTube channel so that we could go over some of the stuff that we're seeing with this next generation of video games. Mostly that there is a lot of technical detail being released and not enough expertise talking about it. So we figured we could give our insight. I and Eric both come from a background in developing video games, and we thought we might be able to clarify some things.
That's right.
Nice, nice contribution there.
I do my best. Just gonna...
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Well, let's carry on. So today we're going to talk about the UE5 demo that was released by Epic, I think 2 weeks ago, to show off what the PS5 could do, but more specifically what their next generation UE5 engine could do. They go over a lot of technical details during the video, and some of it makes very little sense to anybody that's not a game developer. So what we're going to try to do is cut through the cruft. We're going to be able to talk about what they probably mean and give some insight into what it means for a gaming experience. And hopefully this can be really informative. If you like it, let us know, ask us questions, and hopefully we'll cover it in a future video. So slight preamble to this. We're not making any claims that we have any insights or forward knowledge about anything Epic is doing. All this is speculative. So it's likely that we're going to be wrong on large parts of this. But we're borrowing from knowledge that we have from developing for so long and working with this sort of technology day in and day out. Eric, do you have anything to add?
It's mostly that it's extrapolations of we're going to extrapolate based on what we see, and as Justin pointed out, of our experiences in the games industry. And actually, if you do happen to know more about a certain topic that you're listening to us and you're saying, oh, they're way off base, please do, write to us and help us fix our stuff, because we'd love to learn and improve. And make sure that we're communicating as well as we can and getting stuff as right as we can.
Yep. A couple other things. This is certainly a Sony marketing video. I don't think they officially confirmed it, but it's pretty clear that Sony and Epic have worked together to create this marketing piece. In some ways, it's kind of smart. And we can talk about that a bit later, but certainly some sort of paid promotion. They've been working together for a while anyways. And this is probably the best way for them to show off what next-gen tech would look like. Staple that to their PS5 marketing, and you get a pretty impressive demo that actually makes it look like next-gen is coming. The other thing is this is what Epic's next-generation game development engine looks like. This is what Fortnite money buys you. And there's some pretty impressive technical advancements that are going on in this, and we'll break each one down. So let's get on with the video.
Hello, I'm Brian Karras, Technical Director of Graphics here at Epic Games.
Hi, I'm Jérôme Plateau, Art Director of the Special Project.
A few years ago, we got together as a team and brainstormed where we thought we could push forward the state-of-the-art in real-time graphics. There were two key areas that stood out. The first, dynamic global illumination. Beautiful bounce lighting instantaneously.
I don't have to be constrained to do a game where the world has to be static, and I'm able to iterate a lot faster.
And we call this new system Lumen.
I don't know. Is there anything that you want to cover on both this and their nanite technology that they talk about?
Well, nanite is coming up in the video. That's the next thing that they cover up until about 1 minute 13.
I mean, they barely cover anything in this. They're just like,
right. This is just
here's marketing speak, and this is why you should be.
It's their orientation. It's here's what we're gonna talk about in this video. And with Lumen, the big point is the global illumination is the bounce. They call out bounce lighting specifically, which is basically the concept of accumulating light that as it bounces around surfaces within a scene, and how if you have a white wall and a green wall, you're going to get a little bit of green coloring on the white wall because there's some of the light transfers, and it's just kind of encapsulating that piece of it. That's typically done with kind of ray tracing, is the classic way to do it. It's the brute force way to do it. And, we're starting to see them kind of orient us towards thinking of doing that in real time with,
and generally like just more advanced lighting models that, couldn't be done in real time in the past generation.
Right.
We'll dive into that a lot more as we actually see the technical demonstration of it. So let's carry on, move forward, and we'll look at their blip about nanite.
Great.
We're about to show you what it is capable of. But first, there was another area that we thought we could push forward: truly virtualized geometry. The artist wouldn't have to be concerned over poly counts, draw calls, or memory. We could directly use film quality assets and bring them straight into the engine.
And that's a big deal for artists. I just want to be able to import my ZBrush model, my photogrammetry scan, my CAD data, without wasting any time optimizing, creating LODs, or even lowering the quality to make it hit frame rate.
In the end, that's what it's all about: art that just works. And we call this new technology nanite.
They talk about nanite. Nanite is is a new system that they're pretty hyped about, and it's a good technical demonstration that they put forward. The important thing here is that they're actually saying what you need to know. I think you could probably listen to what they say and walk away with now games are using, huge, massive models that or objects that are using cinema quality details, and there's some truth to that, but I think mostly they're focusing on there's an efficiency gain for the development side. It's as you'll see in their technical demonstration, they'll point out what is actually given to the gamer, but more so than anything else, this is aimed at developers. This is a productivity gain that is important.
Yeah, and on a technical side of things, real quick comment to add to that, they give their first hint in that first blurb about the kind of underlying implementation of what they've done with the system, and they call it virtual geometry. Yep. Which we'll come back to as part of the as we dig into this. But
here is the future of Unreal Engine running live on a PlayStation 5.
Awesome. Let's take a look at it.
Yeah, I just want to point out here that they mentioned PlayStation 5. Again, this adds credence to the point that this is almost certainly a marketing video with Sony, but we can cut through that and sort of focus on what this means for next gen.
Do we want to talk about how those are typically done in the games industry?
The marketing videos?
Yeah, so Sony would have come in and said, this is what we anticipate, what we expect happened. Sony came to Epic and said, we understand that you're working on some technology. We know because you've been working with our SDK teams to make sure that this is doable. We want to put forth a demo video that shows off some of what can actually be done in real time with this new system. Can you develop something and put together a video that shows off the power of your technology and our platform? And then there's probably some measure of like, we will do all the production and we'll pay you a certain amount of money to do this, and a deal is struck to make that happen.
Yeah, and I think you pretty much captured everything there. I think maybe the only thing to add is it's probably a bit more organic than Sony propositioning Epic to have this video done. They've been working together for some time because Epic's not going to make a next generation engine without consulting both Microsoft and Sony to support their next gen platforms. But yeah, I think more to your point, they are going to, or they were working with Epic to make sure that they had a showcase piece that actually showed off next gen technology versus what Microsoft showed off a week or so ago with their gameplay reveal stuff, which was mostly last gen games that were running on next gen hardware and didn't really show any significant advancements in both graphics and really gameplay experience. So
this has to be the right way.
Yeah, I guess we could point out what's happening here when the opening shot of whatever the character's name is, her opening up her hand and showing off this point light that illuminates her face. If you look at the details within that scene specifically, you're seeing actually some pretty complex lighting model off the bat. You can see like her nose is casting a shadow on her face. The light, the softness of the shadow trailing off along the structure of her cheek. These are complex lighting models that I don't think you really saw last gen. I don't know if you have anything else to say on that.
No, I think the biggest thing to me is that I'm not sure about the how the point light contributes light to her model, but the interesting thing to me is how they transition from that directly into the global illumination side of things. I mean, it appears as though they probably do a fade in when she turns the light on in her hand, and then when they fade out and she gets rid of that light, it doesn't all go away.
Right.
It is now revealed that she's there, and that light is all indirect. That's all global illumination, at least in theory. They could be doing something subtle where there's always a small amount of light from a directional light or something like that available. But given that even in the darkness here, there is self-shadowing and other stuff happening, it's more likely that it's the global illumination. At least that's my take on it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Before we continue, let's stop a moment and take a look at some of the key features of this demo. Much of what you see was built with Quixel Megascan assets, but instead of using the game versions, we used the cinematic versions, which would typically only be used in film. There are around 1 million triangles each, and thanks to virtual texturing, they all use 8K textures as well. Nanite can render an insane number of triangles very quickly. There are over 1 billion triangles of source geometry in each frame that Nanite crunches down losslessly to around 20 million drawn triangles. What does that many triangles look like? This isn't noise. These are the triangles, each a different color. Most are so small that they look like noise. Nanite achieves detail down to the pixel, which means triangles are often the size of pixels. This amount of geometric detail requires shadows to be pixel accurate as well, and Nanite can do that too.
Well, let's focus specifically on the because they say we're using photogrammetry models, which are highly complex models. They're generally created by using an IR scatter to produce. It's sort of like a very complex version of
Connect.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it is Connect, right? And they produce these super high quality models, and then they can map the photo texture that they have onto these things. So what you're getting is these super highly complex models. They're not actually created by artists. They're created by specialized cameras. And there's the doublespeak that they're saying here is that the model itself is 1 billion triangles or something like that. However, what you're seeing in game at the resolution you're seeing in this shot is about 20 million triangles. So going into that a bit, what are they actually saying here? Like what?
Right. You know. Right. Okay. So what they're doing is the source models are these extremely expensive things that have all of the raw data. And these are the things that you would toss into a rendering system and render for cinema. They pointed that out in the video. What they're doing is sampling those effectively. And they have, since this video has come out, we've been the benefactors of time here. There have been some details that they've talked about and how they do this. And there's basically 3 tiers of detail that they kind of dive through, where they're streaming portions of those representations of those meshes to the GPU, and then they have a certain processing strategy to go in and pick the right vertices to show, so that they're not, if they showed every single vertex for what they had at, even if you're way down a hallway, you'd be rendering hundreds of thousands of pixels or of triangles per pixel, which is all wasted.
Right.
But because of their system, they can actually dig down and say, well, we only really need one triangle there. So we're going to pull out enough pixel or vertex data to cover that pixel. And then we stop. We're good.
Right.
So they've found a way to optimize, the source data is huge, but the actual data that the GPU sees and that's rendered is far, far thinner than the source data.
Right. With the target being one triangle per pixel that's available at your given resolution.
In that period where it looks like it's just a bunch of noise, what they're showing is those are actual triangles being drawn in the colors.
Right.
And you see as the camera pans, it's actually really interesting to see. You can see some of the triangles shifting, and the colors of those triangles changing, and that's because it's picking. This algorithm is picking different vertices and reconstituting triangles on the fly from the source data. So it's actually doing that. I'm sure that it would look more wild if they had that view going while they were walking through the tunnel. You'd see a very different thing, and you could see if you watched a single space as it came closer and closer to the screen, you would see the more and more pixel information or detailed information kind of streaming into that space.
Speaking of lighting, all of the lighting in this demo is completely dynamic, with the power of Lumen that even includes multi-bounce global illumination. No light maps, no baking here. Without GI, all of that beautiful lighting is gone. With Lumen enabled, we can move the light and the bounce changes instantly. Okay, let's keep going.
I think to preface this is there are a lot of physics involved with how light interacts with the environment. We talked about it earlier with global illumination and talking about how light bounces off a surface and will reflect light onto other surfaces. So when you have a strong light coming in through, I don't know, in this case, a skylight and bouncing off a rock, it's going to illuminate other parts as well. And you get, a sort of more full looking image. I'll let you talk about what global illumination means. And then we can talk about what this means for future games.
Right. So what they're drawing a comparison to here is, so when you're speaking to a game developer and you mention global illumination, you're typically saying, in the current generation of technology, there are a couple ways of doing it, but the most common is baking light maps, or any number of similar names. But the basic idea is the same. It's you're taking lighting in a scene with static geometry, static levels and spaces and in your scene, and static lighting that doesn't change, doesn't move. This could be a street lamp. It could be the lighting in an office. It could be the sun outside. Those things aren't going to move, especially if your game doesn't deal with time of day. If those aren't a factor, then the light values of the space that you're in are constant. They don't change for the most part. And what that enables you to do as a game developer is to say, okay, well, what if we pre-calculate all of these lights? So the process of baking a light map is effectively saying, hey, computer, go figure out all of the light and take a ray from this light source and bounce it at that triangle and have it bounce around to other triangles a certain number of times. And then with each time it loses some energy, and it's going to apply the color of that light. It's going to A, pick some up from the source, and then B, put some into that location. So what it's effectively doing is painting color onto the geometry in the space, mixing color. And that is baked out into effectively a picture that you then map. It's a texture map, and you just texture it onto the geometry as a part of the lighting pass, and it gives you this kind of more natural space. As you pointed out, Justin, the softer shadows you get are in relation to that, because you'll have light bouncing from stuff, and whereas you get a hard shadow if there's nothing in the air or nothing around that's kind of reflecting light into that space, it suddenly lights up. And that's actually what you see in the video at 251. They turn off global illumination, and that's just hard shadows everywhere. that's what's going on. Is when there's no bounce, you don't get any extra color. And the baked lighting is an extremely expensive computation. It's an extremely expensive thing to do because they're effectively ray casting, and which is what Pixar and other
Animation houses,
cinema, exactly what they do as their lighting model, let's say. But that's all offline rendered. They do that with render farms.
Now, I'm going to try to quickly summarize what you've gone over. I think
Sure.
top level is, in order to achieve this level of lighting, which you've probably seen in games before, the way that you would achieve that before is you'd have a fixed light position that could not move in the game in most cases, and that also meant the geometry in the game had fixed positions. It couldn't move. In that way, you could achieve a pre-calculated light map that would give you these sort of complex details. What they're showing here is a light source that moves and can transition throughout the game time to give you more sense of realism. In this case, they open up the skylight as she's walking up to it, and this was technically unlikely to happen in games of the past. What this means for games going forward, it means, well, obviously the dynamic light sources transitions from time of day. The other thing that you benefit from this is the objects in the scene are not static at this point. As you see in this demo, like rocks fall from the ceiling and they get illuminated in the same way everything else does in the scene.
To be clear, there were other things that game developers could do to get some measure of dynamic real-time GI, global illumination, but none of it hit the same quality levels that we're seeing with this demo. So it's exciting to see it because now suddenly a whole set of restrictions have just been removed.
Cool.
I'm going to really quickly pause just to bring up one other thing. As they move the light, it's interesting to see I actually really appreciate them for doing this. You can see there's almost like a haze shadow, like a light shadow that goes by. And by shadow, I don't mean a dark shadow. I mean that there's like a trail that the light leaves as this kind of almost volume of light content that just kind of slowly catches up. That is part of probably indicative of some of the lighting model, that there's some global illumination that is left over, and it will their bouncing is somewhat optimized so that it will continue, and the quality is not an immediate, you set the light and it's the next frame it's there. There may be some warm-up time that occurs as part of their algorithm, and it's clearly good enough to be extremely impressive. But it is also does have limitations, and that seems to be one of them. At least it could be an artistic decision, but I suspect that it's more of an optimization.
Now, another question here is, and I've seen this asked in forum boards and whatnot, is this an example of using the ray tracing systems that NVIDIA and AMD have been talking up for quite some time?
I wasn't sure of this until there was an article done, and some of the Epic employees have kind of spoken about this, and it's not actually the same at all. They aren't using the hardware ray tracers. This works on all the older GPUs and graphics hardware that doesn't support any of that new stuff that's being built by particularly AMD and NVIDIA. It is still ray tracing. It's just not ray tracing against triangles or some of the polygons in the scene. It ray traces against different representations of the scene. So it's still casting a ray, but it's casting an array through different kind of conceptions of what the scene is. In the article they talk about height maps, voxels, and sign distance fields, which are three very technical terms. But you can kind of think of them as different levels of granularity. At one end you have like resolution, I should say, very low res stuff. It's very fast to get through, to cast a ray through certain pieces. or through this layer, I should say. And then when you start needing more detail, you drop down a level, and then you drop down to the fine grain level. But by then you've also reduced the amount of space to worry about. So your data processing is fast, and the amount of memory you have to worry about and the space of that computation is much smaller. So it makes it a lot faster overall.
And I think there's something else to point out here too, which is you mentioned it earlier, brute force, which I think in the most traditional sense of ray tracing, and I think you see this in Microsoft's Minecraft demo, is in Minecraft being a fairly cheap game to render, just given the quality of textures and the geometry itself. It's easier to do in this, but brute forcing, a straight up ray tracing model is not always the best way to do things. Although it's the most technically complex, and they do it in cinema, it's also highly inefficient and robs resources from other things that you may want to render. So I think it's a pretty natural progression to say, like, we're not using a straight up ray tracing model to get this dynamic global illumination. They're using some pretty intelligent tricks to make it something that can be rendered on the fly and rendered relatively inexpensively to get what you're seeing here is this really complex scene that has very complex geometry. Global illumination is being applied to many things on the scene and not just very specific areas. And you have these obviously very highly detailed background and environmental models that it may be more difficult to do if you're doing a brute force ray tracing method.
We've made some great additions to our audio system as well. Convolution reverb allows us to measure reverberation characteristics of real spaces, like actual caves that we sampled, and reproduce them in virtual spaces. Sound field rendering allows us to record and play back spatialized audio. All of this adds up to a more immersive experience.
Yeah, I guess to kick this part off, you should be listening to this demo with headphones on, because you're going to catch a lot more detail than you would have if you were listening to laptop speakers or something else. Eric, I'll let you talk more about the technology that they're using.
Yeah, so they're talking, I actually played much beyond 312. I went to 326. And they spoke about a couple things. One is the convolution reverb, and another one is the sound field technology. The convolution reverb is typically used to capture the quality of a space, so that if you have a flat sound, I'll call it, there's a term for it, but I'm blank, a dry sound, which is unmodified, as empty, as pure a signal as you can get for a recording. You can then play that back with a room's impulse response, and you can apply a room. So if you went into a cave, you could record the impulse response for a cave, and then send all of your sound effects to it using that impulse response and that convolution reverb, and they would sound as though they had happened inside of the cave. That's kind of what they're talking about here. Is they went out and did a whole bunch of recordings to create those convolution reverb impulse responses, so that it sounds as though they're making them available as well as part of their resources. They spoke about having the library of content available, that those videos. I'm curious now. It kind of sounds here as though they're making the impulse responses available as part of that. So not only can you get a cave, but it'll sound like a cave, which would be pretty amazing especially for indies who are looking to get into this and get a playable demo up quick so they can start to kickstart it or something. The next piece of it, the sound field, starts to talk about kind of positional audio and ambisonics. Ambisonics is basically just a newer, more precise way of being able to position audio. If you have a bird chirping, moving across a scene, you can get a better audio sense. If you closed your eyes, you could pinpoint it in space better than you could with non-ambisonic, non-binaural audio, just stereo. It's hard to do that in make that sound right in stereo. And this is one of the new features that the Unreal Engine 5 audio apparently supports. It may also work in Unreal Engine 4, at least with the latest that they announced at the same time as this video. It's unknown. It may be in beta.
And to your point, this may be as a response to the advanced surround sound systems that are being included. Xbox, I believe, is using Dolby Atmos at its core, and Sony was touting that they're sort of forgoing Atmos and going their own way with a virtualized binaural system that will give regular stereo headphones a surround effect based off of acoustic ear models. There's stuff to point out here about the self-shadowing that's going on here. Her shoulder pad is casting shadow on her arm, but what you'll also see here is there looks to be some subsurface scattering happening on her skin. You see like the reddish glow that's happening as the sharp light is transitioning to shadow. That red glow you get is because as light passes through skin, you get some diffusion and you get some part of the visible spectrum absorbed, and what you get is red light back out. It looks like it's being calculated into the regular lighting model here. Again, in last gen, you'd see this in places like during cutscenes, during in-game cinema pieces. This is happening. It looks like it's happening in real time during the gameplay pieces, which is pretty impressive.
This swarm of bats was created with our Niagara effects system. Particles in Niagara can now talk to one another and understand their environment like never before.
You hear the developer pop in briefly to say to show off that the bats using Niagara effects. I think he goes on to say that there's an amount of awareness the bats have for each other, which the particle system seems to be using some sort of rudimentary AI. They don't really go into much detail here, but throughout the demo, you'll see some pretty impressive particle systems. And it looks like they're adding a lot more to the simulations that are happening here. I don't know, Eric, if there's more to include there, if you're noticing anything about how the particles are behaving that are like a step above last gen.
Not particularly. I mean, I think I haven't personally worked with the current Unreal particle systems, but from what I understand, the new aspect is what they call out, which is the ability for particles to kind of be aware of one another. What exactly that means, I'm not actually sure. Is there something in there related to kind of, is it spatial awareness, i.e. some kind of element of physics going on, or at least kind of distance detection? Or is it actually that you can now script them to an extent and have some kind of like network of updates that will, what's the word, kind of proliferate throughout the collection of particles in that grouping. It's a little bit unclear, but at least having some kind of awareness allows them to do things where they're not running into each other or going through each other. And I think that's probably what they were most specifically talking about. It's also possible that you could do a flocker, like a flocking system where, okay, let me back out. You know how you have birds that fly and they can do the V shape, and they seem to kind of automatically do that, and they have the lead bird and then a bunch of other birds. It's possible that like you could write scripts or set up the particle system with such an awareness so that you can kind of elect a guide of all those particles and then have it kind of build out that shape as part of the particle effect.
You didn't think we'd make you sit through an hour of this, did you? Thanks for watching, and check out part 2 for the rest of the UE5 demo and our commentary. If you like what you saw, subscribe to watch more videos of our commentary and analysis of game announcements and game technology.